Hi there, this is Kelly Malloy, and today I'm going to be talking to you about one of my favorite topics, and that is sugar. So, if you've been feeling like your sugar cravings are something that you can't control, or maybe you've actually even considered yourself addicted to sugar for a long time, maybe it's been out in the open, maybe you've had it secretly in hiding, this class is going to be for you. And I hope that it will encourage you. I hope that it will give you something that you can implement to actually be free from sugar. And I can tell you that it does work because I myself am a recovering sugar addict. I embarked on this way of eating and taking care of my body more than 15 years ago. And there's a freedom that's waiting for you. So let me share my slides with you and we'll get started. So, breaking free from sugar. And just a little bit about me, I am a certified health coach. I became a health coach in 2008. So you'll have to do the math depending on when you're watching this. I graduated from the Institute for Integrative Nutrition in New York. I'm also the creator of the Back on Track Cleanse. I've been running a nutritional cleanse program for probably 14 or 15 years now. And so one of the things I really love to do is help people realize how much their way of eating can impact not just their physical body, but their emotional body and their spiritual body as well. I'm also an educator for the New Hampshire Alcohol and Drug Abuse Counselors Association, and I do teach at the Riverbank Recovery Center here in New Hampshire. And last but not least, I'm also an essential oils educator and, of course, a recovering sugar addict. So I want to share a little bit about my story just so that you understand that I get it, especially for those of you who may be kind of embarrassed or, um, yeah, self-conscious about your addiction to sugar. So I grew up a skinny kid. So my mother really encouraged me to eat dessert. She encouraged me to eat anything to try to put weight on. And that became my habit. She made wonderful, healthy meals, but we always had pie and desserts and cakes and things. And so I was skinny, so I could eat as much of that as I wanted to until I wasn't anymore, right? When I got to college and I started to gain weight, all of a sudden I needed to change my way of eating. And that's when I started to first realize that sugar was really a problem for me because I'd never tried to give it up before, right? I kept feeding the beast. And now that I was trying to change my dietary habits, I was having some real trouble doing so. And I got to the point, I mean, this went on for years. I was probably in my 30s when I really took a strong stand against sugar in my life. And I was white knuckling it. You know how that goes? Where you're like, try really hard to make it through the day without caving. And I would cave, sometimes at 9 o'clock at night, sometimes at 11 o'clock at night. Sometimes I was going back into the garbage after I'd thrown out a cake and taking it back out of the garbage to eat it. I was without a doubt exhibiting behaviors of someone who was out of control when it comes to sugar. I also was completely preoccupied with it. So if we were at a family function, even something that was like wonderful, enjoyable family time, I was thinking about what dessert was back at home and how much I wanted to get back there and eat it. So food, particularly sugar, desserts, were on my mind almost all the time. And it was in 2008 that I actually found a book and read a book, and it has changed my life, and it has lasted and worked for me all this time. And so that's a lot of what I'm going to be sharing with you today, as well as what I've worked with my clients on over the last 15 years in helping many of them overcome sugar addiction as well. And I'll give you more details of my story as we go through. So, what's so bad about sugar? Well, most of this I think you probably already know. We know that sugar is acidic, and anything acidic will leach calcium from your bones. So, if you're concerned about bone density or bone health, then sugar is not a friend to you. Sugar takes away from your body's enzyme stores. So, we need enzymes to break down and digest our food. They're super important. They do lots of other things too. And sugar comes into your body without any enzymes. So it actually requires you to submit some enzymes for its digestion. Sugar has no nutritional benefit. People will tell you that you need glucose, but you do not need to get it from sugar. You can get plenty of glucose from fruits and vegetables and other foods in general. Sugar can lead to diabetes, obesity, tooth decay. I'm sure you all know that already. Sugar also feeds cancer. So cancer cells, if you've ever heard of or know anyone who's had any testing done for cancer, there are tests that they use sugar to actually draw the cancer cells out to see where they are. And so sugar feeds cancer. And so if that's something of concern to you, as I think it is for many of us, then sugar's not your friend there either. And sugar has the same defining characteristics of any addictive drug. When you take it away, people have withdrawal. When people are given sugar over time, people that have, sugar addiction, they will need more and more of it over time. Another similarity with addictive drugs. So, how do you know if you have a problem with sugar? So, besides the obvious things that we mentioned already and those measurable health conditions, there are some subjective ways that you can figure out if you have a problem with sugar. My guess is that if you're here at this class already, you probably have a good idea. You probably have a notion that you do have a problem with sugar. But one thing to look at is, can you just have one? If someone brings out a plate of cookies, can you have just one cookie? Or do you feel a compulsion to continue to have more, even if you're not hungry anymore, even if you're full, right? So for me, when I was a sugar addict, I could be full up to here with food and feel like I could not ever take another bite. And dessert would come out, and somehow, miraculously, I would be able to eat it, right? But that inability to just have one is a classic sign of sugar, having a problem with sugar. Preoccupation with desserts, carbs, wine, where you think about it throughout the day, even when you're not hungry, or maybe you think about it when you're at a family function or an event. Um, that idea that, oh, there's some cake back at home, kind of idea. Having a history of unmet health goals due to an inability to stay off sugar, simple carbohydrates, wine, etc. All of those turn into sugar in the body, so you might not recognize it as a sugar problem. Like one of my favorite forms of sugar was bread. I loved to eat bread, lots of bread. In fact, I would eat bread over dinner all the time. And that was just turning quickly into sugar in my body. Changes in behavior or mood when you don't have it. So, do you get cranky? Do you get sad if you can't have something sweet, right? Does it ruin your day? Is it something that you're longing for? All right. And will it have an impact on how you feel? And then having significant reactions to sugar or the letdown after. So, a lot of times we can recognize this more clearly in children. We give them sugar, they get hyper, and then they crash or they get cranky. So, it does also happen with adults, right? So, you may not be aware of it, maybe something that you can start to watch and pay attention to, but oftentimes when adults have sugar, if they have a problem with it, and not everybody has a problem with sugar, I should state that right from the beginning. There are people that can just have one, and we usually hate those people. There are people that can take a bite out of a chocolate chip cookie, put it down, walk in another room, and forget that that cookie is even there. They're not like you and I, right? They probably don't have a problem with sugar. But if you have sugar and you have a significant reaction where it makes you happier, it makes you feel better, it makes you, more joyful, it puts a smile on your face. And then later on, you feel low again and feel like you need something else. You need another pick me up. That's how the adults often will have that reaction to sugar. Okay, it's also not as easy as just saying no. Right. So if other people have said to you, well, why don't you just stop eating that then? And you just want to strangle them, right? It's frustrating because you wish you could just stop eating it. You really do. You really know it would be so much better for you and you'd feel so much better in your body. But there's a compulsion. There's something that causes you to eat those things, even though you know that they're not serving you. And serotonin could be a big piece of this. So I want to share a little bit about this brain chemical. There are other brain chemicals that play a role in sugar addiction and sugar cravings, but this one I think is the one that is the best place to start. All right. So serotonin is a brain chemical that has a huge or plays a huge role in determining your mood. Are you happy? Are you sad? right? It's a lot of times, if you're familiar with seasonal affective disorder, a lot of those folks actually are suffering from low serotonin levels. Okay, it has to do with D3, which actually is necessary for the production of serotonin, but affective disorder is one of those signs of low serotonin. Okay, so serotonin is a brain chemical, it's a neurotransmitter, and it impacts your mood. It also has a huge impact on cravings because it basically determines your level of satiation. Are you satisfied? Are your needs being met? Do you have enough? Are you hungry? Are you satisfied? All right. So if your serotonin is where it needs to be, you'll feel like you have what you need. You'll feel satiated. You won't have cravings. All right. And serotonin is also the brain chemical that gives you impulse control. It puts the brakes on those impulses. So if you're, trying to eat healthy and somebody sticks a brownie in your face with low serotonin, you're going to eat the brownie and then be like, ah, why did I just do that? If your serotonin is where it needs to be, it's going to be much easier for you to say, no, thank you. I don't need that today. All right. So serotonin, really important brain chemical in terms of mood, in terms of cravings, and in terms of impulse control. Now, here's the kicker. Some people are born with lower levels of serotonin. All right. And it's a little bit more complicated than that. But for today's class, I'm just going to say they're born with lower levels of serotonin. It has a lot more to do with the receptor sites in the brain and how many receptor sites you have for serotonin. But if you have lower levels of serotonin, you can probably already see how this would create an issue for you. Okay. Yes, people with lower levels of serotonin will tend to be more sad or depressed or have more mood related issues or challenges. They will tend to have more cravings, especially for sugar and carbohydrates, and they will tend to have poor impulse control. All right. And that impulse control doesn't just have to be related to food, nor do the cravings, right? So cravings could be related to alcohol, drugs, shopping, gambling, all right, anything like that. So children of alcoholics are one group of people that tend to have this brain chemistry that I'm talking about with these lower levels of serotonin. So one thing we can look at is the brain scans of alcoholics. And when we do that, we can see that those brains are different. There's a different configuration. There's a difference in the number of receptor sites for serotonin. And that brain configuration can be inherited. So when I teach at the Recovery Center, this is an important point, and it's usually kind of a pause moment for a lot of the guys in there, because I'm not saying that their addictions to alcohol or drugs are something that, they couldn't change, that they were just born with it. And right, that could be a factor. There can also be trauma. There can also be stress that occurred. There can be other factors that play into this. But when they come to understand that they may have been born with a different brain chemistry, it starts to free up some of that habit that we have of beating ourselves up, of just saying, you're no good, you can't handle this, you have no control, you're blah, 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 blah. All right. So maybe in this moment, if you have that history in your family, it can actually give you a little bit of a sense that maybe this isn't all about what happened to you in your life or what you're not doing well or why you're not strong enough, but maybe there's a piece that hasn't been addressed that's been there from the beginning. So let's look at that. So the brain chemistry of alcoholics, as I mentioned, can be passed down. It can be inherited. All right. And that brain chemistry doesn't mean that those children or grandchildren will be alcoholics. They just will have that brain chemistry that makes it harder for them to produce the right amounts of serotonin. So they're going to tend to have some mood issues. They're going to tend to have some cravings for something. Again, it could be shopping. And they're going to have poor impulse control. All right. And this brain chemistry does make it harder for these people to feel good and harder to avoid sugar if that's their drug of choice. So when you don't feel good, right? When your serotonin is low and you don't feel good, you're kind of down in the dumps. It's natural for us to look for something outside of ourselves to make us feel better, right? So again, in the recovery center, I tell the guys, alcohol wasn't your problem. It was your solution to not feeling good. And what we have to do is we have to heal your brain and teach you different things and different ways to feel good so that you don't reach for that anytime you feel sad or down or depressed or angry or whatever it is. All right. So, serotonin again plays a huge role here because if we were feeling good to begin with, and not that everyone's going to feel great every moment of every day, but if you have that baseline of feeling good, you're not going to need something outside of yourself the way other people do. Okay? So, really key in that respect. So Kathleen DeMason is one of my heroes, I will say. She's the author of a book called Potatoes, Not Prozac. And this was the book that I stumbled upon. And I was actually just in nutrition school, just finishing up nutrition school. And I came across this book. And there I was in school for nutrition, learning about all this wonderful stuff about food and nutrients and making my body super healthy. And I had been white knuckling it for probably 2 years, trying not to eat sugar. And it was really taxing. And if you've ever done it, you know, right? It's kind of like trying to keep water balloons underwater, right? The energy that that takes to keep them from popping up is, or just balloons underwater maybe is even harder to imagine, right? Really challenging. And that's how I felt. I was white knuckling it, trying so hard. You know, I was going to school to become a certified health coach. I didn't want to be eating sugar, but I had the cravings and it made me irritable. It was a nightmare. I found this book and I read this book and I read through it so fast because I was like, oh my gosh, I think this is me. This is me. This is me. This is my answer. Yay, let me do it. I'll do it right now, real quick. And I did do it. And I got off sugar. And, you know, I stayed off sugar until the first traumatic thing happened in my life. And then I was right back, right? Just like an alcoholic or a drug addict, right? Just having that relapse, same thing. I was bam, right back in a binge of eating sugar. So then I went back through the book. And if any of you get this book, I recommend that you do it this way. You can read it full through one time, great. But when you actually start implementing, just do one step at a time. Give your body and your brain time to actually implement and get comfortable before you move on to the next step. All right. And that was 2009, 2010 that I did that. And I can tell you that it works. All right. You could stick a brownie or a chocolate chip cookie in my face right now, and I would say, no, thank you. I don't want it. I don't need it. All right. So Kathleen DeMason was she ran drug and alcohol centers, recovery centers for many years. And she started to recognize that there was a difference in certain people. Certain people were doing really well in recovery, and then other people were not. And so she really started to look at why that was the case. And she finally pinpointed that the people who were doing really well in recovery were eating very differently than the people who weren't doing so well. And so she actually went back to school, got her PhD in addictive nutrition. She ran a little recovery group herself and implemented the food and saw amazing results with it. And she wrote the book Potatoes, Not Prozac, which is really largely about sugar addiction. She explains the brain chemistry of addiction in the book. She takes you through how it all works in great detail, but in a way that's easy to read. It's not like reading, you know, you don't have to be a neuroscientist or anything, but I highly recommend that book for anybody who's dealing with what we're talking about here today, Potatoes, Not Prozac, and you want to get the revised and updated edition. So Kathleen will say in her book and in her teachings that sugar, in those who have this brain chemistry, who have this sugar sensitive brain that maybe they've inherited, that sugar acts like a drug in those brains. And it will cause a temporary and short-lived, I guess that's the same thing, temporary and short-lived, right? Release of serotonin. So it will make you feel good. It will raise your mood. It will calm down the cravings. It will even give you some impulse control, but only for a very short period of time. And then you need more. All right. So unlike what really naturally causes a release of serotonin, which we're going to talk about. That would be a long-term release. That would give you much more stability and groundedness. Doing it with sugar is very, very short-lived. And if anybody knows anything about addiction, you know you can start with a little bit, but then you gradually need more and more and more. And it's the same thing with sugar. So if you notice, you could have a little piece of chocolate and that does the trick for you, but then, the next night you want a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. That's another sign of addiction. All right. So those who are born with this brain chemistry will be more susceptible to sugar addiction and depression. When serotonin is low, depression and or anxiety are very common. When serotonin is low, cravings for carbs and sugar are intensified. So is this you? Does this fit? Does this resonate? Does this make sense to you? When you have this brain chemistry, you'll be more irritable or disruptive when meals are not consistent. You can also be hyper or high after having sugar or simple carbs, followed by those lows or feeling depressed or even lethargic. You may have constant cravings for sugar and carbohydrates, and yes, bread counts, right? So bread, white bread, turns into sugar in the body. So if you are that person at the restaurant, when the bread comes, like you eat all the bread and then you can't eat your dinner, that's that's just turning into sugar. Having a low pain tolerance, being easily upset or emotional. And this is another component we won't get into today. But in addition to serotonin, this brain chemistry, typically people also will have low GABA or low beta endorphins, all right, as well as blood sugar issues. So depression, seasonal affective disorder, ADD, ADHD, a lot of folks with this brain chemistry also have those. All right, so the good news, there is good news. If this has resonated with you, if you're thinking, yeah, this sounds like me, or this might be what's been happening for me, and I've never addressed my serotonin before, I have good news for you. All right, we can heal and change our brain chemistry, our body or biochemistry in general with food. Okay. And you can, I promise you, you can create a different relationship with sugar. All right. And I'm saying that the way I'm saying it because I know many of you may be like me and you may not believe it. When I was going through my sugar addiction, I really didn't think I was ever going to get out of it. It had such a hold over me. I felt so powerless that if someone had said to me one day, you're not going to have sugar in your life at all, and you're going to be happy about it, I would have thought, there's no way. Like all I could see was me white knuckling it and being miserable for the rest of my life. So there is freedom. I promise. All right. So the step one. So this again, I'm only going to share some basic pieces with you here. I would highly recommend that you get Dr. DeMason's book if you're interested in going through the program. That would be ideal. You can also reach out to me if you need any help with that. So the number one step in this is protein and making sure that you're getting the right amounts of protein, because protein and the amino acids that we get from protein, that's what we need to create serotonin. All right. So you can look at a lot of people who are struggling with sugar addiction or depression in general, mood issues, and more likely than not, they are not getting enough protein and they're not getting it at the right times of day. That's another piece. Okay. So protein will supply those amino acids, which are the building blocks. Many of you might think of them as building blocks for your muscles. So if you work out, if you're a bodybuilder or into that sort of thing, you know that protein is important for muscles, but it's also absolutely imperative for brain chemicals. All right. And tryptophan, let me take a little drink here. There we go. Tryptophan is an essential amino acid that converts serotonin in the brain. So that's the particular one you really, really want. So those of you, if you're a vegan or vegetarian, you want to make sure that you're getting that complete set of amino acids. So you may need to do some food combining. to make sure that you're getting tryptophan. But again, when we do that, when we get the tryptophan and we generate the serotonin, we're going to be able to put the brakes on impulses. We're going to have a better mood and we're going to have fewer cravings. And in general, your serotonin is going to help you to feel like all is well. Life is good. All right. So who doesn't want that, right? So protein, these are just some basic examples. You probably know protein, right? But eggs, meat, poultry, fish, beans, legumes, nuts, seeds, etc. Again, if you're vegan or vegetarian, get the right complement. But the key is how much protein. All right. And this is again where a lot of us are failing or falling short because we're thinking, oh, if I have a piece of toast with some peanut butter on it, that's protein. But it's probably not enough, not for what we're talking about. Okay. For what we're talking about, there literally is a formula. And this formula was developed by Dr. DeMason, and it has worked. It has worked for me. It has worked for probably hundreds of my clients who have gone through this, and it's legit. All right. So this is the protein formula. And you'll find this also in the book, Potatoes Not Prozac. So you'll take your body weight and divide that number in half to get your protein grams for the day. Now, this is really just based on brain chemistry. So if you are someone who's building a lot of muscle, if you're bodybuilding, you are probably going to need more than this. Okay. This is really kind of the baseline for making sure that the brain is being fed. Okay. So if you divide your body weight in half, you'll get the amount of protein that you need in grams per day. Then you're going to take that number and divide it by your number of meals. So if you're eating 3 meals a day, you'll divide your daily number by 3. Okay. And I give you an example here. So if you weigh 180 pounds, you divide that by 2, that's 90 grams. That's how many grams you need in a day. 90 divided by 3 is, assuming that you're eating 3 meals, is 30. So you would need 30 grams of protein at each of 3 meals. Now, if you weigh more than 180, 30 is the cap. All right. So we don't recommend, unless you're doing the bodybuilding or other things that really require a lot of amino acids, she doesn't really recommend going over the 30 grams at each meal. Okay. The second step in helping to maximize or optimize your serotonin is to make sure you are getting some complex carbohydrates with your protein. So complex carbohydrates is a tongue twister. These are not your simple carbs, right? So simple carbs are your white flours, your sugars. Your complex carbohydrates, they get digested more slowly. They give you a slower release of energy and a longer lasting form of energy. They usually come with more fiber and more nutrients. So these are things like your whole grains, oats, brown rice, quinoa, but also vegetables are complex carbohydrates. So what these do is they allow that very important L-tryptophan to actually cross the blood-brain barrier. And this is explained in the book. There's a lot of detail I won't go into, but complex carbohydrate with your protein is important. You don't need a lot of it. You don't need to eat like, 4 pounds of oats. You just need a little bit of complex carbohydrate just so that the body allows that L-tryptophan to get in where it needs to go. All right. This will create that longer lasting energy, more stable glucose than simple carbohydrates. And again, it will provide that fiber that will help with digestion, stool motility, and your gut flora balance. That fiber helps to feed your healthy gut bacteria. All right. We also want to have 3 meals a day at consistent times. And I'm saying it like that because I know that some of you are doing intermittent fasting, and this might fly in the face of everything that you thought was best for you. And I'm just going to share that intermittent fasting can be wonderful. There are incredible benefits to it. I actually don't think that intermittent fasting is anything new. It might seem like it's a new fad, but years ago, we ate dinner and then we didn't eat anything else until breakfast, right? And we ate dinner a lot earlier than we do today in most cases. So we were fasting for those longer periods of time overnight as a rule. So I love fasting for that reason. It is what allows our body to do its detox and repair work. It allows, hormones to be cleaned up and metabolism to change and so many valuable and important things. But if you have a brain chemistry that is making you more susceptible to sugar addiction. If you have low serotonin, then I just want you to ask yourself, has the intermittent fasting been working in that regard? Okay. So it might be allowing you to lose weight. It might be, helping you reach other goals, but are you still craving sugar? Are you still on you know, that delicate line of, am I going to cave at any moment? And if you are, then I'm just going to share this with you, let it sink in a little bit, see if it resonates with you, because you can go back to intermittent fasting after you have balanced your brain chemistry. All right. And you may be in a much better place to do it then. So this is part of the program that Kathleen DeMason recommends, and it includes 3 meals a day at consistent times. The reason for this is people who have that sugar sensitive brain chemistry often also have volatile blood sugar, right? Blood sugar that's going whoop up and down all day. And so when you're eating at consistent times, it's especially when you're eating protein, right? Protein is a great blood sugar stabilizer. So when you're doing your meals at consistent times, it is going to stabilize your blood sugar. Okay. And if you get shaky or irritable when you don't eat, if you get a headache, any of those kinds of things, those are all additional reasons that you want to work on your blood sugar. Okay. But the biggest one in terms of serotonin is when your blood sugar is balanced, it'll also calm down your cortisol. Okay, so cortisol is a stress response hormone. It gets secreted from the adrenal glands anytime there's a stress, right? If you don't eat for a long period of time, your body will think that there is a lack of food. It doesn't know that you're just trying to, not eat so much, or that you got busy at work, so you're skipping lunch. It thinks, oh my gosh, there's a famine. There's no food available. That's why she's not eating. And it will raise your cortisol. Okay, now pay attention. This is really important. When your cortisol spikes, a number of things happen. Well, many things happen, but there are a couple that I'm going to share with you specifically. It shuts off your serotonin. Why does that happen? Your cortisol is high, your body's in a state of stress because it thinks there's no food. So it shuts off serotonin because it doesn't want you to think that all is well. Your body is there, and this response, this stress response, is there to keep you alive. So if you're just feeling good, like, yeah, I'm good, I don't need to eat, your body's going to raise that cortisol and say, no, 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 you need to go find food. Get up, go, run, find food. Okay, so it's going to actually turn off your serotonin. That now is going to give you cravings. Maybe your mood's going to change. You're going to maybe have some anxiousness, maybe some sadness, depression, right? It's going to change your mood. It's going to give you those cravings so that you go out and look for food, and it's going to give you poor impulse control. So now you're feeling stressed, you're craving sugar and carbs, and you don't have good impulse control. It's a recipe for disaster if you're trying to eat healthy. Okay. The other thing that cortisol will do is it will shut off digestion. So when your body's in that state of stress, right, it's saying, no, no, no energy goes to digestion. You just shut that down. We need all the energy so that she can run and get food. Right? She's got to go chase some animal and eat it. Right? Sorry, vegans. She's got to go pick some veggies out of the ground. But basically, it's going to shut off your serotonin and it's going to shut off your digestion. Okay, so you have digestive issues, irritable bowel syndrome, cortisol could be a factor in that. All right. And literally, I just had someone yesterday in my office and we were talking about cortisol, and cortisol came up in some of her tests. And I said, you're not going to like this, but the easiest way to calm down your cortisol, I mean, actually, the easiest way is breathing. That is the number one way, is breathing, just breathing, and then breathing with your essential oils, because that has a huge impact on the stress response in the body. But in terms of food, the easiest way to calm down your cortisol is just to eat consistently, because then the body says, oh, there's no lack of food. She's eating at consistent times every day. She's having 3 meals a day. We can calm that whole stress response right down. There is food. All right. So a really important piece of this is calming down the cortisol and keeping the blood sugar balanced. Okay. This also builds some consistency of mindset and some responsibility. So when I teach the guys at the recovery center, I say, look, you may have eaten haphazardly, not eaten one day, eat the next, eat a candy bar, whatever. As a grown-up, it's your job to take care of your body. Okay. It's not your mom feeding you anymore. It's not your mom packing your lunch anymore. You're grown up and your body needs you to take care of it. Your body depends on you to make good choices and to feed yourself consistently. All right. So this is just part of building that consistency of mindset and that self-responsibility. Oh, okay. So sorry. The other thing that can be helpful, all right, so, we talked about protein, we talked about 3 meals, we talked about complex carbohydrates, and we talked about 3 meals a day. The other thing that can be helpful for some folks is to understand how supplements can be beneficial here. And these are just some of the supplements that can be helpful for serotonin, for GABA, for dopamine, for different brain chemicals. I'm not going to go into the detail on these in this class, but you can talk to your doctor, and I highly recommend that you don't start any supplementation with amino acids unless you have the supervision of a qualified naturopathic doctor or medical doctor or functional medicine doctor to help you through that, especially if you're on medications. Okay, so please do not go off medications without supervision from a qualified professional. All right, so how do you start doing this food? How do you start working on the protein? Breakfast is the first place to start. All right, and so getting adequate protein within 1 hour of waking. So using that formula that we talked about, half your body weight, and then divide it by 3. That gives you how many grams you need at each meal. Doing that at breakfast alone to start with within the first hour of waking. Again, that formula, Kathleen DeMason's, Julia Ross, I'm going to talk about in a moment. She also uses something similar. Having that complex carbohydrate, which allows the L-tryptophan to get into the brain, and you need just a little of that. Doing 3 meals a day. Again, do the first step first, get breakfast under your belt where you're doing that consistently. 3 meals a day with protein, you'll have to create a schedule. All right, so this is actually committing to saying, this is when I'm going to eat breakfast, this is when I'm going to eat lunch, and this is when I'm going to eat dinner within reason. So understanding that it may be within an hour, right? It might not be at 2:12 every day, or at 9:15. You might have a little bit of wiggle room, but not so much wiggle room that hours are going by and you haven't eaten yet. Okay, make it a priority. Do some simple meal planning based on what you already know. Don't make it complicated. Don't become the Martha Stewart or try to be the Martha Stewart. Do some batch cooking, get a health coach if you need one. And just know that it's not just the food. So these steps, I promise you, I've worked with so many people on this, they can make a huge difference. Just getting the protein, just doing breakfast for 2 weeks has changed people's lives. So it's really, really valuable to give it a shot. But it's not just the food. Okay, food will help restore the biochemistry. It'll help to give you the foundation for healing, for both physical, emotional, spiritual healing. But it's not the only piece, right? And many times people will come at their sugar addiction from a place of, or addiction in general, right? It's the same brain chemistry, but many people will come at it from a place of, well, I had a lot of trauma or I have a lot of stress in my life. Yes, but it's not just that either. More than likely, there are other components, okay? Whether it's the brain chemistry piece, we can have toxins that are at play. We can have gut microbiome issues where you might be eating the protein, but you're not absorbing it. So there can be a lot of other pieces to this. And what I would recommend is that you start with that first thing that you can do something about, which is how you feed yourself. And if you can just start feeding yourself, making sure you're getting those amino acids, that you're feeding your brain chemicals, getting the nutrients that are necessary to create those neurotransmitters. That can give you kind of that level playing field, that foundational point to start on. And from there, what I have seen and what I know in my own life is I'm in a much better place to work on the other things, right? To work on the stress or the trauma, to get closer to God, because I'm not distracted by wanting sugar all the time. I'm not distracted by how, frustrated I am about my inability, to not eat junk food. I'm not beating myself up all the time, right? I'm not preoccupied by that. And so it allows me now to work on other things in a different way with a groundedness, right? With a feeling of um, I can do this, right? All things are possible. So, imagine someone that's on a therapy couch, right? If you think of that, like, okay, maybe I have stress or I have a trauma that's causing me to do this. Okay, but if you're on a therapy couch and you haven't eaten in days, like, how much are you going to be able to really work through your challenges, right? How much are you going to be able to focus? How clear is your thinking going to be? Right? So that's kind of the analogy that I like to use. So it's never just the food, but the food is a really great place to start. And if you start there and you actually implement some of these things, I think it can give you that opportunity to then take the next steps that you need to in your life and your healing. So these are the books that I would recommend. Again, this was just an intro, but I hope it's helpful for you. Potatoes Not Prozac by Dr. Kathleen DeMason. She does have lots of other books. Let me move this over. So she's written several books related to this topic. She has a book even for children, Little Sugar Addicts, and she has a book for people that have weight loss issues that this is tied into. She also has a wonderful website, and I don't mean wonderful from a technology standpoint. It's pretty simple, but it's a wonderful place for people who have sugar addiction to come together and to learn. And so that website is radiantrecovery.com, and she has lots of different classes and workshops on there that you can participate, groups where you can be, with other people that are starting that first step, or other people who are struggling with sugar addiction and something else. And she's just created a wonderful forum for that. The Mood Cure is another book that's great, and that's by Julia Ross. She teaches very similar things to Dr. DeMason. Julia Ross does a lot more, I think, with supplements than food, but she's also involved in the recovery community. And she has a book called The Mood Cure, and her website is moodcure.com. And the last book I'll mention that I really love is a book by Barbara Stitt. She actually is or was a parole officer. She probably would have liked to be payroll, maybe, but she was a parole officer, and she started to recognize, similar to the way Kathleen did, that some of her parolees, um, they were exhibiting behavior, and she'd come to understand how food could affect behavior. And so she started teaching them and recommending, dietary changes, and literally changed these people's lives. Some of these were career criminals, people who were just constantly, in and out of the system. And by changing their food, she actually was able to change their mood, their behavior, their actions, and change their lives. So that's a wonderful book as well. So those are three that I can recommend for you. What we talked about today is largely in Potatoes Not Prozac, and I think that would be a fantastic place to start. And I hope that this was helpful for you. And if I can be of any further assistance, please don't hesitate to reach out.